Hello and welcome to the CLB Forge podcast. This is a show to help equip you and your church for mission, ministry, and multiplying disciples. I'm Ryan Nelson.
And I'm Mike Natal. Welcome to episode 29. Good friend of mine today on the podcast. Nick and I go back a few years, and I'm happy that we could finally bring him on board. Nick, before we get started, it's been a tradition of ours on our podcast to ask you, what do you prefer, Star Wars or Star Trek?
So I kind of thought I was going to be asked this question, and I don't mean to be like Debbie Downer guy on it, but like, is it safe to say that I really don't enjoy either of them?
That's fine. Do you want to put a different thing in the mix?
It's so okay. You're not the first.
My wife gives me so much grief about this, but like, I watch Star Wars, I watch Star Trek, no Lord of the Rings. I've seen like one Marvel movie. I might be the only millennial in America that fits into that group. But like, I grew up with a dad who was putting like 70s movies on the TV all the time. So I am a millennial, but I watch TV like a Gen Xer, I guess. So my favorite show of all time, and my total hunch is that nobody is gonna like be in this camp with me, but I rewatch episodes of Twin Peaks on Netflix all the time. It's the greatest show ever made. If that's what this podcast is about, we can do that. But I just wanted to put that out into the ether. Twin Peaks all the way.
I will have to check out this Twin Peaks thing that I know absolutely nothing about. That's where I'm at with that.
I get that response all the time.
So I'll have to check that out. Thanks for putting that in my wheelhouse. Yeah, but you know, sometimes you need to throw a little wrench in things, which is good. So Ryan, do you remember when we had Andy Larson, S-E-N, on our podcast? Remember that guy?
I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so remember how I said he was recording from the room that I had slept in?
Yep.
Well, that was actually Nick's old office. And the reason why I slept in it was because I just wanted some privacy during this thing called Mission Minneapolis, which was a huge hit for the youth group that I served at in Underwood, Minnesota. Shout out Messiah Lutheran Church. And it was a huge blessing. And one of the ways that Nick and I kind of cultivated our friendship more was through Mission Minneapolis. And so he's the reason why I slept in that office, which is great.
And you found a way to bring up sleeping in another random place once again.
I know. See, I'm a pro at just sleeping in random places.
Okay, so Nick, the room that Andy was recording from once was Nick's office.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And the room that I had slept in.
Okay.
And that office has never been the same.
Right.
Never.
All right, now
Never.
I want to ask a question that all of our listeners are probably wondering about. This episode's totally off the rails now, by the way.
Yeah.
But Mike, I've noticed
What?
You do not say slept. You say slept.
Slept? I slept. Yeah. Slept. I slept in it. Yeah. You know, the other thing too that I say funny is
that an accent thing or a mic?
It might be a mic thing. I have no idea.
Oh,
so
okay.
The other word that I say, well, there's multiple words. So like, see, Ryan, you and I, you know how there's that Freely Given podcast with Gretchen and Katie?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've listened to that, but I feel like my accent is I am the Katie Copeland of our group because you have very proper English like Gretchen does. And then there's me that just butchers it. So there's another word that I say kind of funny too. I mean, there's multiple, but one of the ones is, so let's see, the word, you got an avenue, you have a road, and then an ST stands for what?
Street.
Yeah, street, right? I say street, like SH. Yeah, street. Deal with it. All right. So before we go completely off the rails,
that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much, Nick, for being our guest.
I think I need to get a glass of water.
Water. Yeah, I'm not quite that bad. I say a few things. Oh, bad is one of the ones that I say really funny too. I say bad. But that's okay. It's bad.
Bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know.
Wow.
Bad.
You know.
All right. Let me intro Nick. So here we go. So Nick grew up. He was born in Minot, North Dakota, and he moved around Minnesota, North Dakota, and Canada for a number of years as he grew up. He and his family, his wife, her name is Brittany. She's a wonderful woman. They have 3 kids, and they currently live in New Prague, Minnesota. Did I say that right? Prague or Prague?
New Prague. I don't know why they say it wrong. They say it wrong. New Prague.
All right. He graduated high school from Our Redeemer's Christian School in Minot, North Dakota. He received a certificate in Bible studies from the Associate Free Lutheran Bible School. He has his BS in psychology with an emphasis on marriage and family counseling from the University of Northwestern St. Paul, and he is currently enrolled at the Lutheran Brethren Seminary. Nick has a passion for reaching the youth and for teaching them about the gospel and how it practically relates to their lives. And now he is currently serving the Lord as director of student ministries at Word of Life Church in LeSueur, Minnesota. A long diatribe to just say, Nick, welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you here.
Dr. Nielsen, Reverend Natal, very excited to be here with you.
Whoa.
Woof.
Flattery will get you a long ways here on our show.
I'm a new guy at seminary. I got to make sure I'm, get my cues. So.
Don't worry. We'll put in a good word for you, too.
Perfect.
It'll be oikos. There's the good word for the day, oikos.
Excellent.
All right, Nick. So why don't you spend a little bit of time telling us about your spiritual journey?
But we only have 10 seconds left of the show because we use it all talking about nothing.
Right. Yeah. So, it's funny. We were just talking about this in the office today about the difference between like boring testimonies and kind of these exciting, the Lord grabbed me from the darkness and brought me in. I probably have more of a kind of a traditional story of I grew up with 2 parents that loved me, baptized me as a child, grew up in the church. Like you said, I'm a graduate of Our Redeemer's Christian School. So I've been in Christian education since like 1996 or something like that, and did that through elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and now into seminary. So being in and involved with the church has been a huge part of my life from day one. And in seeing that, I've kind of gone through a lot of the ebbs and flows of kids who go through homeschool education or private education sometimes go through, where there's that season when the Bible is like just homework and I got to get this thing done, and your faith can feel like it falters a little bit. And then you kind of these swings, and you can look back and say, like, wow, I can't believe that God worked through me in this way. And so that would be a major part of my story. I've been in vocational ministry for most of my adult life. I came out of a super healthy youth ministry when I was in high school. And I remember my first day of youth ministry class, and they asked, like, how many of you like grew up in churches where the youth ministry was non-existent and you want to change that? And there was a number that raised their hand, and there were some. And then the next question was, how many of you grew up in healthy churches and you want to see that continue for teenagers? And that's where I raised my hand. So I have felt the call to tell teenagers about the grace of Christ for a really long time.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, we're really excited to have you here with us today. Today we're talking, we're having a conversation about Gen Z, about the Generation Zers. Can I say that?
I thought that this was the one where we make fun of millennials. Isn't that what we were doing in this podcast, making fun of millennials?
We'll fit some of that in.
All right.
We'll add some of that in. So
Gen Zers.
Yeah.
Solid.
So to kind of set the stage for this, I'm sure most of our listeners are aware of the generational distinctives, but here's a refresher in case you're rusty. So there's the World War II generation, right? They're sometimes called the builders or the greatest generation. Then there are the baby boomers, and they are one of the biggest generation, like number wise, in our country, born between 1946 and 1964. Then there is Generation X, which is those people who were born between 1965 and 1980. And I'm fit into that category. There's 2 subcategories I think that are very important to note. There are Atari Generation Xers, And then later on came the Nintendo Generation Xers. So I'm in the
Felon.
Nintendo. Yeah. And then we have millennials born between 1981 and 1996.
Those are the coolest people.
So I wonder which one you fit into, Mike and Nick. Yeah, so you guys are both millennials, right?
Millennials.
All right.
Yep,
Also,
that's squarely a millennial as it can be.
so,
Yep.
and there's a lot of, and then we have Generation Z, born 1997 to about 2010. And then some say like there's a Generation Alpha, born 2010 and after. And that's kind of up in the air. I think still being defined. But those are some of the basic breakdowns. And I think we hear a lot about kind of cultural jokes and strain between the boomers and the millennials, right? There's a lot of, especially on social media, there's a lot of jokes and memes and things like that about that. But today we're talking about a generation that I think it's overlooked, especially when we're having ministry conversations, and that's Generation Z. And this is the group that you minister to. So it kind of dawned on me a few weeks ago, not too long ago. I don't know, I forgot why I was thinking about this, but I realized all of a sudden wait a minute, millennials are no longer the kids in youth group. Millennials are the young, they're the parents of the young families in our churches. The youngest millennial is like 24 now. And they basically go from like 24 to almost 40. So these aren't the college kids anymore. They're not the students in our youth groups. They're moving into other stages of life, and there's a huge need for us to minister to them and understand them. But also, there's this other generation that hasn't gotten a lot of airtime, I feel like, especially in ministry circles. And that's why we've got you here today, Nick. So no pressure, but you're kind of, at least for our show, you're pioneering this conversation, so you really can't mess it up.
It sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you define a Gen Zer? How do you define someone from Gen Z?
Well, I would say before going with like a statistical definition of it, let me maybe go anecdotal on it for a second. So do you remember the news stories that were coming out in the early parts of COVID back in March? And you're hearing these stories of millennials on the beaches of Florida on spring break that were disregarding any suggestions or feedback from the state government to not do that. And my wife and I, who talk about these generational differences and what does it mean to be a millennial all the time, we really laughed at that because millennial has become this catch-all term right now of like any bad behavior we see young people do, they're probably millennials. And the reality was, those weren't millennials on the beach. It's my wife who had said to me, like, it's Gen Z is the one who is on spring break. Millennials are the ones who are like at home watching Netflix, baking sourdough. Like that's just not like both my wife and I. So I'll give it while I said I'm a millennial. So both my wife and I are 31, and we figured out this year that we can't be called young adults anymore. We're just adults, I guess. And that's where the majority of millennials are right now. Even if you start seeing younger millennials, and I would say to like even focus in on young millennials in the Church of the Lutheran Brethren, who are these young millennials? A large swath of them are probably the youth pastor at your church or the volunteer at least who's ministered in that way. It's the ones who aren't coming into a second career calling into seminary. It's young millennials and now first generation Gen Zers who are the ones that we are equipping and training into ministry. So now to go to, I guess, more of a statistical, definition, millennials, we say 1980, 1981 is where it started, all the way up to 1996. And then you see Gen Z happen after 96. And like you said, they're seems like they're putting the cap on Gen Z somewhere at 2010, 2011, 2012. So like even in my family, so you're talking about this generation Alpha. So I've got 3 kids at home. None of them are Gen Zers. We're even past that.
Wow.
and
Yeah.
trying to figure
Right.
out how to minister to Gen Alpha kids right now,
Wow.
whatever that means. But more than likely, the teenagers that have been in your youth ministries, in your churches for the last at least 6 years, most of the kids that you've seen go through your confirmation program, graduate out of your high schools, those have been Gen Z kids. And those are also the kids who are in your youth ministries, in your churches right now.
Wow. Yeah. That's my kids. I have 4 kids that are Generation Z, and they are in the youth group range. So 3 of them are in middle school and 1's in high school.
The one, so I saw a lot of statistics from Pew Research study, and one of the ones that kind of blew my mind of many is that with the election this year, there will be 24.
Wait, is there an election this year?
Yeah, that's what I heard. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, let me blow your mind.
Of which, go ahead,
when
Ryan.
This episode
you might be doing
records,
it.
so just so everyone knows, we're recording September 30.
Literally the day after what they would be calling a debate happened.
Yeah, and
right.
But this episode is going to air on December 15th. So just think,
this will all be past us.
So it's already
hopefully
passed.
The elections happen, and hopefully results have been certified by this point.
For sure. Well, so in the election,
so yeah.
Wow. So future Nick is speaking to President Nick here. In the election that just happened, 24 million Gen Z kids had the opportunity to vote.
Wow.
That is significant. And I just said it right there, Gen Z kids. But the reality is we're talking about also Gen Z adults and Gen Z voters and Gen Z adults in the workforce and in the military. And the idea that this is like the up and coming generation isn't even accurate. It's they're here and they're already making their impact on our country.
Yeah. Wow.
And our churches.
Way cool. Yeah. So I felt kind of convicted and pigeonholed when you laid out, millennials, and then said, what the millennials were actually doing, because literally I woke up this morning, I let my chickens out, fed my dog, and then I started my sourdough. And then after doing my devotional, I was like, well, what should we do? And I turned on television and I was like, not watching any of that. So I turned on Hulu and watched some Seinfelds. And I was like, I guess I have now reached the pinnacle of millennialism.
Wow. So, by the way, our sister podcast done by Lutheran Brethren Seminary, it's called Embracing the Word, Reaching the World. They just did 4 episodes about ministry to millennials. So they're episodes that aired July 9, 2021, and then one called episode 30 on August 13. So those are the 4 that they just released those a little bit ago. It's a great conversation about millennials and you guys and your sourdough.
Yeah, right. That was one of the funny conversations here in the office. So I share an office with Pastor Jason Lang. And so one of the things we were kind of joking about was that you had a Gen Xer on talking about millennials, and now you have a millennial on talking about Gen Zers. So.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
Nice. So, Nick, if I can ask you, why do you think, since you literally just brought this up, why do you think it's important to talk about Gen Zers?
Yeah, I think it's important for a lot of reasons. I want to affirm any conversation that we're having about generations, because what you're doing is taking a conscious effort to try to understand someone or a group of people that you don't understand very well. So I want to affirm all of these conversations, especially the conversations that LBS had with millennials. The reason why I wanted to come on and talk about Gen Zers is that if we are trying to make plans for ministry of millennials, there's a chance that we're behind the boat on that. And I don't want to be like, I don't want to be the doomsday voice to say that we're behind the boat on ministry to Gen Zers either. We're not, but I think if we wait, that we're missing an opportunity. When we talk about, when you talk about the idea of the sticky faith and that series that came out a couple of years ago, and when gospel stickiness, if that's an actual thing, when those things coincide, we're talking about typically in adolescent and young adult years. If you if you want to minister to your whole congregation, if your goal as a ministry leader is to share the gospel with all generations, then we have to have this conversation now. I think for a lot of reasons, like I said before, with they're not just kids anymore; these are young adults. Here's another maybe way to kind of hit this home. Here during COVID, from a financial standpoint, the generation that lost the most amount of jobs, the most amount of income, the ones that were most negatively affected financially from COVID was the Gen Zers. So Pew Research study says that half of the oldest Gen Zers, which would be ages 18 to 23, half reported that they or someone in their house had lost a job or taken a cut in pay because of the outbreak. That is significantly higher than millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers, and it all goes down. So right now in America, just statistics, right? We can all hear anecdotes, but statistically, the older you are, the more secure your income was. And so when we think of Gen Z, right? So when we think of Gen Zers right now, I mean, we're talking about entry-level jobs, and you're talking about waiters, and you're talking about all these things. And as we've been reading the news, watching the news happen, it's a lot of those jobs that are going by the wayside. So you see this group of young adults who have been taught and said, like, hey, you're going to have a really bright future. And there's a lot of evidence that that's the case. But now that bright future seems deeply unsure.
Wow. That's powerful to think about, because they're starting to enter their 20s, some of them.
Yeah.
And that's the most important decade to be saving, preparing for retirement, and they're getting hit the hardest. Can you tell us more about that, Nick? What are some of the ways that Gen Z has been affected by the COVID pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one of the news stories going on throughout the summer here and into the school year was certainly how were colleges going to respond to COVID-19? Yeah. And who we're talking about there is how are colleges going to respond to the health needs of Gen Zers on their campuses. Of course, faculty and staff, but that's who we're talking about is Gen Z is the one who's squarely in education. An idea that so when the studies were done on this generation, you're seeing that Gen Z is on track to be the most educated generation in American history. So maybe you've heard this term before, or this phrase kind of thrown around in education, that like the master's degree is becoming what the bachelor's degree meant 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Before getting that bachelor's degree was the high education mark to hit, and now you're seeing it in master's programs. So you're seeing a group of young people who are deeply educated and then don't know what they're going to do about that. So the education they're receiving, they have no clue if that career is even going to be there post COVID-19.
Whoa.
I keep talking about this COVID stuff, but this is actually like really, really important because of a generation that is going to be most just completely thrown off the direction they thought they were heading. We're really talking about Gen Zers. So bringing it back to your congregation, who are the folks in your congregation that are maybe concerned about everything about COVID-19 other than the health aspects of it? Your young adults right now are feeling really unsure. And to use a Gen Z buzzword, super anxious about where the world is heading.
Yeah, that's really important to realize too. And you brought it into our congregations. And so are there any tips that you can give our listeners as they think about attempting to engage with Gen Zers?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things we talk about in youth ministry for a long time, and maybe we didn't know that we were attaching it to this generation, but we talk about this idea of authenticity a lot. And so I think Gen Zers are now hitting that age of not having ministry done to them, but where they can engage in ministry with the church. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing young, energetic very capable, highly educated, and really savvy people who are part of your congregation. How are you engaging with those folks to further the ministry of your church in a way that is meaningful? And so it's more than like, hey, can you help like set up the chairs on a Sunday morning? I think we all know that that's an important thing to do, but is that actually the best way for you to engage the talent set and the potential of those Gen Zers? I don't know, right? But that's one of the questions we have to start asking. I think you had mentioned, and Ryan, you can tell me that I'm like super off on this, and we'll edit this out of here. But I do believe that you have a Gen Zer in your household who is helping with the editing of this podcast.
Absolutely. I do.
Right?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is like you have a Gen Zer in your house who has the skills and capabilities of audio engineering. Our perspective of Gen Zers in the church needs to broaden, and that should be an extremely exciting thing for your congregation.
Super shout out right there.
Yeah.
We'll see if she edits this part out, but
so something cool that's happened in the church I attend. So I'm not the pastor of the church I attend, but at our church during the pandemic, the way we do worship changed completely, and a lot of those changes are here to stay in terms of using a digital platform. And a lot of the people engaged in worship are these Gen Z high school and college students that have this skill set that very few others do. Basically, no one else does, and they're recording. I mean, they're leading worship for one thing, but they're also running the soundboard. They're recording the video and audio. They're getting it edited and up on platforms. It's just wild to see how the pandemic has brought in this. I think it forced the church to bring in a group that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have thought about engaging, or it wouldn't have been as easy or natural to do that. Thinking about what you're saying, Nick. Yeah.
I think every generation wrestles with with the idea of what is success and what does it mean to be successful. Pew Research had some interesting statistics on what Gen Zers associate with success. And I think as older generations, we might hear things like this and roll our eyes or kind of scoff at this notion. But here's one of the statistics that I read was Pew Research says that the average salary that a Gen Zer anticipates they'll get in their first job post-college is $60,000. Now, like I said, I think as older generations, we can roll our eyes at that and be like, okay, you need to get kicked around a little bit and see how the world really is or whatever, some of that. But from a Gen Z perspective, this idea of being successful and successful out the gate is that is like the posters that they're hanging above their beds, metaphorically. Is like, we're going to be successful. We're going to be successful now. It's not new with Gen Zers. So speaking of success, it's not new with Gen Zers, right, to have teenage idols or successful young people. We've seen that forever. But if you look at maybe the most influential Gen Zers right now, you can start to get a snapshot of the values of this generation. So the two people that I would throw as maybe the most successful Gen Zers would be Billie Eilish. If you don't have kids in your church who are listening to Billie Eilish, which I will guarantee you that you do, if they're not listening to it, their friends are listening to Billie at school. Okay, and so you see this young woman, Billie Eilish, become the youngest artist to ever sweep the Grammys, winning all 4 major awards. That literally had never happened before. You're seeing greater society point to her and say, you're successful and we're going to reward you for that. The other person, and I understand that she can be a controversial person, but you have to just look at what she's done, is Greta Thunberg. And so if you don't know who Greta Thunberg is, Greta Thunberg's the teenager from Sweden who's become maybe the most vocal environmental activist on the planet. So you have a Gen Zer here, you have a teenage girl who is put on Time Magazine's 100 most influential people list. She's the youngest Time Person of the Year winner. Forbes put her on the world's 100 most powerful women with no generation tag associated there. And she has 2 consecutive nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize. What I'm saying is that Gen Zers aren't looking for like, well, when I grow up someday, I'm going to do this. They're looking at like, this is what I'm going to do right now with the influence or the idea of influence that I have right now. How many of your kids are on Instagram and curating what their Instagram looks like? They're doing that, one, to see value, but also because they have an idea of this platform that they have, and what are they going to use it for? Most of the values of our country, of sinful people, right, is for self-glorification and things like that. And that's something that where the church can come alongside and actually teach, hey, it's actually not about you, it's about Christ. But the idea that I can make an impact as a random Gen Z teenager or young adult has been ingrained in every single one of them.
So can you tell us a bit more then? How can we as a church help them, with their desire to be influencers, to use their platform, to change the world, to make a difference? How can we engage them with that drive that they have?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 2 of the fruits of the Spirit really come to mind for me on that. What tools would I want to equip Gen Zers with, and that we try to equip teenagers with in our own youth ministry here at Word of Life? The first one would be peace. So I had mentioned earlier, the buzzword of Generation Z is probably anxiety. If you look at the picture of mental health in this country, it was really through the millennial generation where we came to grips and maybe a better understanding of the idea of depression. I don't think you're hearing students, you're hearing teenagers speak about being depressed as often as you are hearing all of them say, "Oh, I'm dealing with my anxiety. Oh, I'm feeling really anxious today. Oh man, I really like my anxiety fluctuates up and down." One of the big things that we try to teach is the peace without understanding, is the peace that is a gift of Christ, is that this anxiety, beyond the mental health aspect of it, this is actually something that Jesus, the Prince of Peace, can actually deliver to you. And I think with that peace, then it comes self-control, is that because you have a platform, because you can do anything on the internet, should not mean that you should do everything on the internet. And what are you going to use your influence with, if it's even just an influence with your friends or an influence in your community, whatever that ends up looking like, influence in your church, being able to help and come alongside teenagers and young adults to teach self-control, to teach wisdom in, hey, you know what, God has given you a voice. This is what it looks like to use that. And I think as church leaders, by teaching those 2 things, and maybe the third one is that we talk about constantly, is that you are loved, that the Sunday school song of Jesus loves me is so deeply and fundamentally true, especially when you don't feel it. Those 3 things taught together, I think we as church leaders are going to be completely blown away by how much further out Gen Z, the kids that you're mentoring and teaching, how much further they can run out than anything we ever anticipated. So you're seeing it now in COVID with technology coming to how many of our churches here in the Lutheran Brethren now started live streaming or recording services that weren't doing that 9 months ago or a year ago or whatever. I think you're going to see opportunities in your church if you engage, mentor, teach, love the Gen Zers of your congregation and minister alongside them instead of like, how do we minister to them? I think you're going to see a lot of fruit from that.
Nice. Yeah. And I mean, you kind of set up our wrap-up question really nicely with that last comment, which is consciously, how can churches minister to these individuals as Gen Zers better than we currently are? And it should be alongside, right? Not minister to, but
yeah,
absolutely. So, I think I don't want to lean on these kind of Christianese, ideas. I heard once that you see these cycles that come through the church. So maybe for a while it's evangelism, and for a while it's leadership, and for a while it's discipleship. And it seems like leadership is the one that is kind of swinging back around and becoming applicable to this generation. But if you're actually going to track down that road in leadership, is looking and identifying the leaders and leadership skills of your Gen Zers. And so in what ways, in what non-traditional ways can you engage with Gen Zers? So maybe it's more than just playing in the worship band, or it's just more than working in the sound booth, or these things that is like easy for us to offset. But I've met so many Gen Zers that when they are given the confidence and the tools to run and teach a Bible study to their peers, to make decisions in what the future of the ministry is going to look like. For me, my youth ministry runs better, and we reach more kids when I give the major decisions that we're going to make over to a committee of Gen Zers, and I let them speak into what this thing is going to be shaped as. So I think that's one, is just is maybe being willing to give the good stuff off of your plate sometimes to Gen Zers. I think we tend to get rid of I don't really like doing sound anyway, so we might as well get a teenager in to do this or whatever it is. But being able to minister with them in the meat of your ministry is going to be better for you as a church leader. You're going to learn things about yourself and maybe areas of weakness of yourself, and you really truly are equipping the next generation. Like I said, Gen Zers, our oldest Gen Zers right now, are working through the call of, should I go to seminary and be a pastor in the Church of the Lutheran Brethren? We should give them all of the reasons why they should do that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that. Thanks for everything you've shared with us today. I really appreciate that. It's been great having you here, helping us understand the challenges this generation's facing and the ways that they want to be a part of our faith community, of our churches, and how we can do that. So thanks so much. To our listeners, thank you for listening to the show today. We'd love to cover topics that you're looking to hear about. So send us your questions and comments at podcast@clbforge.org. Don't forget to subscribe to the show. We'd love it if you share the podcast with a friend or colleague. And tune in next week as we talk about the 6th and 7th derailing factors in our Church on Track series. The wrap-up of the first part next
Caboose.
Week. Yes. Anyway, thanks all for listening.
Thanks, Nick. See ya.
Thanks, guys.